Hello, how's it going? And welcome to the A Way to Live Well podcast. My name is Andrea and I'm your host. I'm absolutely thrilled to be back after a little bit of a break from the podcast where I was just taking time out to assess, reflect, and decide where to go next. Not only with the podcast, but also with my life. And at some point, you just get stuck in this kind of feedback loop where you are deciding what to do next, trying to figure it out, and it's an unending sort of inner dialogue of no answers. And what really needs to happen in those situations is just to take some kind of action in order to go forward and make a shift. And so that's what I'm doing now. I'm getting back to it and I'm glad to be here. I'm really excited to share with you the upcoming episode. I had the honor of speaking with Andrea, who is a longtime friend. She is now based in Hawaii. She does some really beautiful, amazing work that I'm really excited to share with you. She works specifically with women's circles, holding them for women of all ages. It's a way to empower women to reconnect back with their cycles. She helps women to reframe the way they think about their cycle, that it's not just PMS, mood swings, hormones, pain, discomfort, and potential embarrassment. It is about being completely in your body, finding ways to nurture yourself and take care of yourself at each stage of your cycle in order to better support yourself and to live well. She is also a doula, she is a mother, and she's a wife as well. They live in this really amazing space in Hawaii and in Europe. Over on YouTube, you can check out the video so you can have a little sneak peek into her home. And you'll hear some little Hawaiian frogs chirping away in the background. Thanks a million for tuning in, and I hope you enjoy the show. Cool. Hi, Andrea. How are you doing? I just want to start off by saying thank you so much for coming and chatting to me on the podcast today. It's an absolute honor to have you here, and I'm really excited about our chat.
I feel so blessed that I get this opportunity to share so much information that I think is really important with you. And so thank you for the opportunity. And it's great to see you.
Amazing. You too. So interestingly, we met in Guatemala, where you're from, but you're currently living in Hawaii. So maybe just give us a little bit of context how you know, from Guatemala in Hawaii now, how does that happen?
I guess different ways for different people. For us, it kind of happened. My partner and I, husband and I, met in Guatemala as well, in Antigua, in the same place, around the same time that I met you.
Yeah.
And we traveled together. We had traveled each of us separately, and then we traveled together. And then when we decided to formally commit to being a couple and take it, a little bit more formal and start a family together, we went back to the United States, which, by the way, here in Hawaii, it's a big deal. Most locals like to keep it, the United States is the mainland. They don't really consider still themselves part fully of the United States. So we went back to the mainland, as it's called, and we're in Wisconsin. Very different weather and climate than here, but that's where we started our family. And it really began because with our first son, we had a midwife, and she had done her midwifery practice in Maui. So in the island, we live on Hawaii, which is the big island, and then the island right next to it is Maui, and that's where she had done her midwifery practice. And so it kind of was lingering oh, that's really beautiful, learning how to be a midwife in Hawaii must have been amazing. And then with our second son, he was breech. So what that means is that his feet were first.
Yeah.
And so all of a sudden, I wasn't that confident because she kind of said something to me and I wasn't that confident that it was going to go the way I wanted to. So we started researching what our options could be. And Hawaii lingered in our head of like, okay, if she's studying midwifery over there, maybe we could just fly to Hawaii and have the baby over there with a midwife there, which didn't happen. Actually, I with a yoga inversion, I was able
Yes.
to flip, which is pretty awesome. So we had a regular natural birth with him at home, nothing out of the ordinary when it comes to that. But then the idea and the visuals that we had seen kind of stuck to our head. And it seemed kind of like Guatemala, but in the middle of the Pacific. So we were still kind of nomadic, leaving every winter, you know, avoiding the cold Milwaukee winters
That
and
sounds good.
finding winters. And we did that with the kids for 2 winters. And then the last winter we decided we were going to come here, but we kind of had the feeling that it wasn't just going to be a winter. So we literally started selling everything and kind of took a one-way ticket without telling anybody that it was a one-way ticket. And things kind of lined up after that, you know, and then we've been here since then.
Amazing. I'm so excited to hear about, because it feels like that is all intertwined in you meeting this woman in Wisconsin, the midwife who studied in Hawaii, and then coming to Hawaii, and all these experiences you had yourself with birthing. It sounds like that may have spawned kind of the work that you do now, and I'd love to really get into that and to hear about it and just your passion for it. So maybe you could share
Yeah,
a
it
little
does seem like we were guided here, honestly. And things worked out so easily after we came. It was like, okay, you're here. It's done. Oh, here's an interesting story. And I need to say, I'm going to try to say it in a nutshell. We wanted to buy a car because we didn't want to have the rental car. And Will was like really on it. My husband, he was like, oh, we have to find a car. He's like checking Craigslist all the time. And one day, this place we're renting, he wakes me up and he says, it's almost 9:30 at night. And he's like, I think I found a car. I'm going to go buy it. I'm like, it's 9:30 at night. Are you sure? Okay. He took off. He came back and he's like, I'm going to go drop off the guy because I just bought the car. It's a nice car and blah. So he takes him the next morning. He tells me, oh, you know, you really would have liked this guy. He's a chef. His wife is a midwife. And she's going back to Kansas to finish her midwifery practice. And I bought the car from them. You know, it's got this great mana, this great energy. So I think it's a good choice. And then he's like, but you should have seen where I took him, like where I dropped him off. I know it was the nighttime, but it was like driving through Jurassic Park. You know, this gigantic trees, this forest, there's a jungle. It was like amazing. And he says, I think we should book an Airbnb for a weekend just to go check it out. And so we book one randomly. We don't know the area. And as we're driving there, he's like, oh, this is the road. This is really cool. And I'm in awe of the road, which happens to be like one of the most famous roads on the Big Island. And then as we turn to go to the Airbnb, he's like, oh, well, strange. This is like the same road I dropped him off on. And I'm like, okay. And then we keep on going. And then when we turn to the house, like the GPS is taking us, and he's like, no, this seems like the same house I dropped him off in. And when we park, the lady from the Airbnb, she comes out and she's like, is that Philip's car? And we're like, yeah, we just bought it like a week ago. And he's like, they were house sitting for us for the last couple of months. I'm like, oh my gosh, that was so strange that you like randomly pick one without knowing and we end up there. And that just became like even more and more, her and I were meant to meet for sure, because then when I got pregnant with my daughter, they moved back to the island. Literally, I found out I was pregnant. Within a week and a half, somebody told me that they had moved back. I'm like, she's got to be my midwife. There's no way. She ended up being our midwife, and the connection and everything she's taught us, it's like amazing. So no doubt that she and I had to cross paths for sure.
That's so cool. I love those stories of serendipity. You can't deny when those things happen. You're just like, okay, I surrender. Right?
Yeah. There's just nothing you can do. You're like, what? Okay. This
Yeah.
is it. Happen this way.
Amazing. So if you could tell us a little bit about this amazing work that you do with young women and women in general, how you came about that, and I guess it came from that first meeting. From what's her name, the midwife?
Oh, her name is Catherine Lightfoot.
Catherine Lightfoot, beautiful.
Yeah. Well, it actually, it all started when I became a mother, when I became pregnant, sorry. Um, 7 years ago, we were all still, we weren't necessarily mainstream, but when it came to pregnancy, we didn't realize that there was a whole other world that was there that we didn't know of. Like, honestly, back in Guatemala, I I don't know anybody that had a natural home birth since ever. So I was kind of like in the mentality of, oh, pregnancy, you have your baby at the hospital. But right at that moment, we had watched a documentary. There's another one of those stories, a documentary a week before we got pregnant. And then we decided to get pregnant. We literally got pregnant within a week after we said, we're trying to try this. And the documentary was so fresh in our head. Like, it's called The Business of Being Born. And we were like, maybe we should rewatch that video now that we're pregnant. And so that changed everything. It opened the door to a whole different world, which we're really blessed that happened at that time. But after I gave birth, so after I gave birth, when I got my menstruation again, Will, my partner, he was like, I brought you a gift. And he got me my menstrual cup and reusable pads. And he's like, here you go. We're not going to make more waste. And I'm happy about it. And you should be happy too. And that's cool. And it was all about the environmental part. I didn't really honestly at that moment realize that it was going to take me into a deep connection with myself. And that's how it really started. I started changing this mentality of this conditioning that I had of like not wanting to have anything to do with my menstruation and my blood and how sacred it was. And I guess that combined with the fact that I just had a baby really pushed my hormones up to say, this is more sacred than we've ever been told. And why am I ashamed of this? And why, why do we not talk more about this as women, from women to women? Like, what is this whole thing? And so I started really just learning more about my cycle and tracking my cycle and my moon, like with the moon, and just started changing the whole idea of what I had known for the earlier in my life of what menstruation was. And then when we moved here and I got pregnant with my daughter, which I didn't know she was a girl. We never found out until she came. But during that pregnancy, I met Catherine. And so she herself, being such an empowered woman and a traditional midwife, so fully in the traditions of a completely different idea, even from the other midwife that we had in Milwaukee, of birth, and empowering me like, you know what you're doing. I'm only here in the background. Like, I'm not even going to talk to you. And honestly, that's how she was. She literally, every time I had a contraction, I would moan, and I could hear her humming in the background to my rhythm, but she would not even talk to me, and fully empowered that I knew exactly what I was doing. And that was like a completely different birth. And then added the fact that I had a daughter probably was really interesting. And during my pregnancy, she taught me about a teaching called the 4 baskets, which is healing your womb journey. Basically, you go back to your time when you were a being inside of your mother's belly, and how that's our first rite of passage, right? The first journey that you get to do by yourself in this physical body. And that stopped being sacred as well. And it became so medical intervened that from the very beginning, our first journey, we are taught that we are a number, that it needs to be rushed, and that we need help to do it. When we don't, it's just us and our mother, and that disconnection there creates a life long-term deep-rooted emotions that sometimes are negative depending on your birth situation. And that really opened another set of doors for me, that I was like, whoa, I already knew that birth was sacred, but this took birthing to a completely different level of sacredness that I wasn't aware of. And I started working with her on that, on my own baskets. And then later, one of my friends, her teenage daughter was struggling really hard. They were having a really hard time as a family because of it. And I knew of her journey coming from the mom side. And almost exactly at the same time, we had a workaway girl from Germany staying with us at the farm who happened to be 18 years old, and our friend's daughter was 17 years old. And she was going through a lot of depression and self-esteem issues. And I had the opportunity to work on her baskets with her and realized, wow, these are two girls from the same generation, different continents, different cultures, yet they're experiencing that same thing because their first journey was the same. And then no other rite of passage, after that, like when we become women, it's just like, oh, great, here's a pack of pads for you. Good luck. And you're like, wait, what? My mom, she was an amazing woman, but she didn't tell me anything. Like, not even like you're going to prepare yourself because within the next years, this is going to happen. Nothing. So when it happened, I was like, oh my gosh, now what? I remember my dad being the one like, oh, congratulations, you're becoming a woman. And I'm like, what does this mean? So I realized that a lot of like me, a lot of other women and young women still at this age with all the tools that we have are not being empowered properly in this rite of passage when it comes to coming of age. So I thought it's something I have to start working on. And then it just lingered in my head. And then after that happened, I got the opportunity to become a birth doula. And I went through this training with amazing women around me. And in the training, I realized that out of all the women that were there, very, very few of them actually wanted to be doulas themselves. Like, actually, I don't think they really wanted to be there for other people's births, but they wanted to know the information, they wanted to connect, and they wanted to be ready if they ever had kids of what to expect from birthing. And it was more about us trying to be together as women again in a community that made me realize, wow, there's a lot of work that has to be done with women, not just in birth side, but like all this other realm of womanhood that we are ignoring that is still there, that unspoken of. And then this whole year has been kind of different. This doula training was at the beginning of a year, so the end of February. And right after that, as the world starts transitioning into what we have right now, I had no other choice but to be home. And I came across this website called Journey of Young Women for Young Women. And it sounded amazing. And it was like, learn how to mentor young girls and coming of age and guiding circles. And I'm like, okay, this is it. And all of a sudden I had this huge calling, how you're like, okay, I'm going to go for it. And the information in that training was amazing. And it was almost like me healing myself, right? Because it kind of has to happen that way before you help other people. And realizing that I never really got any of it and how amazing it could feel if I would have had it, and how amazing it could still be for the young girls right now. And so I started leading some circles, and that's how it all kind of started. And then when I led the last circle, the closing circle, I do a mother and daughter circle. And that took me to a different vision, like, wow, these moms are still there. Like now, even at the second generation, you're already a mom and you're raising a woman, and we're following the same conditioning. So I'm like, how do I really help this? I have to get women in these circles to like talk to their inner young girl so that they themselves can have the information that they still don't know. Like up to the moment, they still don't know how to really work with your cycle and what hormone levels mean physically and emotionally for you. And that's kind of how it all happened, if it makes sense. All like little of like, oh, there's this here and nobody's talking about this. Like, this is a big thing. And it was really beautiful. I made this crown with the moon phases. It's more like a headband, a felt headband with the moon phases for the girls. And so we put it on each girl and told them, that the time was going to come, and for that time that they should remember that women are around them and that we're all in this together and that we all go through it. And it was really empowering to see the mothers that hadn't done that for their young girls to be able to have that opportunity, even if it already had happened for some girls. Just the symbolism of a ceremony is so beautiful. And I hope that in our vision is that it starts becoming more normal, like bringing back these ceremonies of that coming of age when you're introduced to what you're going to become.
Yeah.
And instead of being afraid of it, handing the knowledge that you need to know so you understand and work with it a little bit better.
Yeah, that is so beautiful. You said so many really interesting things that I'd like to sort of go in a little bit deeper on. Um, I, I think it's so important, as I remember whenever that happened for me, not feeling like I could talk to my friends, barely feeling like I could speak to my mother, and my dad definitely did not know about it, nor did I want him to know about it. There was elements of shame surrounding it, of wanting to conceal it, um, and that stays with you for a really long portion of your life until you start to, like, if you're curious, like, look into it. But I know there for a fact there are many women who still feel like it's an inconvenience, like they almost want to get rid of it or not have to think about it. And I think a lot of times that's where birth control comes in, and being thrilled about not having to experience that. Where, like, I'm at a stage now where if I didn't get my period and I wasn't pregnant, I would be highly concerned. Like, it feels like that's not a natural thing at all. But I guess I'd love to speak a little bit more about what exactly, just in case people don't know, what a doula is, and why that's interesting for people who don't necessarily want to become a doula. I guess all this information is in there, and in those courses. So what is it exactly?
Right. So a doula is a word for, we're basically emotional and physical support for the birthing partners, not just for the women, mostly for the woman, but really if we see it, when there is a partner involved, they are one. And our main goal as a doula and a woman in that presence for another woman is to hold space for her and try to be as supportive with whatever she feels like she needs support in, so that she and her partner can focus themselves just on the birth, on how it should be. So she can get in tune with what she's feeling, with the contractions, with her breath. And we're kind of just there to be extra, physical support. At sometimes you don't know how a birth is going to be fast, it's going to be long. And sometimes it could be really long. It could be exhausting for both the partner and her. So we come into, like, if the partner needs a break, we're still a complete physical person that the mother can rely on without feeling like she's left alone in the hands of a stranger at the hospital.
Yeah.
When it is a hospital situation and they know what they don't want to have happen, we can be the voice for them while she's laboring so she can focus on her birth. We can say, we remember what we spoke about and we're here to, like, guard your space and make sure that things go the way you want them to. And give a lot of educational support to moms and partners so that they can make decisions based on the information that's accurate, so that they can make the decision that's best for them. Again, there's a lot of things they don't tell you. Like going to a hospital, they don't tell you that you can say no to a lot of things, right? On a regular hospital situation, let's say you go and you're not at the pushing stage yet, or you're not in active labor yet, but you're there, because it is kind of a business. They just kind of want to rush you out as much as possible. So you are induced, and that kind of escalates slowly, but most of the time it just happens. It is one medical interference, and then all of a sudden you need another one, and all of a sudden you need another one, and all of a sudden maybe your birth is completely different, and you end up having a C-section without a need of a C-section, and then you feel like you were kind of robbed of that birth experience because you didn't know that you could say no, or you didn't have the proper information of why certain things were happening, or if there had to be medical an intervention, why it had to happen. So we're there to kind of facilitate that for the mother and hold their space for both the mother and the partner for whatever they need.
Yeah,
And when it's a birth at home as well. So that's basically what a birth doula does.
yeah,
There's a lot of different doulas. You could be a birth doula, you could be a postpartum doula and just focus on the recovery. You can be a fertility doula and help in that area. And so yeah, it's not just one thing, but that's kind of where the word what a doula does for a pregnant mother and her
Ama-
partner.
amazing. So yeah, quite different from a midwife, because more of like emotional, spiritual support as
Exactly.
well, right? Yeah, that's really
We
cool.
can work together because in our scope of practice, doulas, we don't do anything medically. Like we don't give anything. We don't, we're just exactly that, the emotional and extra physical support that they need.
Yeah,
Um, and midwives do what they're great at doing and amazing at doing. And it kind of makes you realize that there's this web for you as a woman and that you don't have to birth alone. And you don't have to birth with strangers. You can actually choose the people you want to birth with. And there are options. I mean, there's options all over the place, except, this is not information that's normally handed to you when you get pregnant.
yeah.
So
That's so true. There's so many things you just don't know. I did my yoga pregnancy teacher training, and I was just like, wow, there's so much like information that's just not shared. People just kind of say, and I don't really know why it is. Is it like a fear that people may be worried about pregnancy if they share all the details? Or I think information is power, like you say. It is giving that power back to women. um, but yeah, I guess it's interesting that we kind of, again, it's another thing where you don't talk about it. You just kind of yeah, hand the power over to somebody else to kind of guide you through it,
right.
or pull you through it.
And so like three right three rite of passages for women, three journeys that we have, and women and men actually. I really want to point out that a lot of my work, even though I'm focused on young girls, because I have two boys myself, really my vision is to be able to become so knowledgeable of how to guide these girl circles so that I can guide young boy circles for their coming of age, because one is not more important than the other, right? This whole balance comes with both the male and the female knowing their role and their sacredness in the whole, you know. So but if you look at it, the birth process, like that first rite of passage and that first journey, if everybody doesn't have the right information, that one being like you coming into this life without being acknowledged and without it being sacred has some weight on your soul. And then you get to coming of age part for both men and young men and young women, and that doesn't get done either. So now you have two journeys, two rite of passages that have been completely negated or devalidated for you. And then you have birthing, which is another rite of passage, another gigantic transformation in your life, and that is also not being done. So there's all these things that just keep on adding up into us just feeling like, how can we successfully achieve any goals if every single one of those moments it was either ignored or somebody did it for you, kind of.
Yeah,
So super important that we become aware of um, these transitions in our life, in our cycle of life, so that we can take the power back
yeah,
to be ourselves and be empowered about them.
yeah. I think it's really interesting. It's like the things we assign importance to kind of shifted in the last, I guess, few hundred years or so. And we forgot that, because I think it is a more a case of forgetting, right? I think probably people did value these experiences at a higher level at some point in history, till we started moving away from from these things as being the most important, right? Or handing the power over at some point. The other really interesting thing, and I think it's so great, and it's been life-changing for me, is what you spoke about in terms of these kind of reusable feminine products. Also, like the words we use for these things, like sanitary products, it also kind of gives them a negative connotation, like it's something dirty and we have to sanitize it. And moon cups, which are amazing and good for the environment, which means we're caring for Mother Earth, right, as we go through our cycle. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because I think there's like some kind of like still wariness around it, like maybe it's a little woo-woo or hippie. I know in the yoga community it's quite well known, but outside of that, less so.
Yeah, no, it's definitely less. It's still, because if you look at it, so when you go to the regular aisle in the grocery store or wherever it is that you buy your menstrual pads, you have all your pads disposable, right? So that's the first thing. A lot of like the rubbish that we create with that, and then full of chemicals. And if you're lucky, you'll find organic cotton ones, and that's really important to know. Like everything that is put in these pads, if they're not natural and organic, contains a lot of chemicals. And you're putting this in an area that is so susceptible, and then you're putting this once a month for long periods of time, and inevitably it stays with you little by little, you know. And then you have the tampons, right, which if you're lucky, again, you'll find organic cotton tampons, which is more ideal than the regular tampons. But for the tampon users, like you think you're putting in a tampon and then you don't realize that those cotton is one of the most chemically treated crops. And so if we take care of what we eat, we also have to take care of what we give to our body. And literally you're inserting this in a sacred vessel part, you know, like this is where your baby will come out, whether you are going to have a baby. And if you're not going to have a baby, that's still no excuse, you know. It's still the women reproductory system is so amazing. And then we wonder why you know, in the future a lot of women get certain cancers or we have certain issues, and we sometimes don't immediately link it to the products that we use, but the heavy chemicals that are used on them is a super, you know, a lot of women have noticed a difference in their fertility because when they used all these products and then they stopped using those and went to more natural or reusable approach, and that fertility changed. And it makes sense, you know. And so the the menstrual cups, if you've used a tampon, there's no reason why you wouldn't use, you know, a menstrual cup. You're still inserting something. I think what people feel kind of scared about is when you see it, right? Visually, it's like this cup in the size, and you're like, oh gosh, how is that ever gonna fit there? You know, it's gonna hurt. And I'm like, well, you know, it's a muscle that's meant to like stretch 10 centimeters for your baby to come out. And this is like a silicone, you can, you know, you fold it in nicely and it's the same size of a tampon. So I think the size is really what gets people trying not to use. They're like, oh, that's too big.
Yeah.
But there goes the knowledge, right? If you know what our yoni is capable of, you would realize that it's not even going to hurt. I mean, I get it. The first couple of times is tricky because it's something you're not used to and you have to learn how to navigate it. No more or less than you have to do a tampon. And then I feel like what it is for a lot of people is that complete disconnection. And so you don't want to touch your blood at all. And eventually that happens with your cup, right? You have more contact with yourself. And that's another interesting point, right? Like we do feel ashamed. Like I remember the first couple of times there was this conditioning talking to me, like, oh my gosh, you know, I really have to like, you know, I'm so in contact, and like instead of a disposable pad, I don't even have to do anything, just clean myself. And so there's a big shift that happens when you move to reusable products, because you have 100% connection with it, reminding you that there's nothing wrong with this. Whereas, you know, the commercial disposable ones even have a scent so you don't smell the blood. And it's a complete disconnection. We don't realize that in our brains, that disconnection is way bigger than we think. And it creates a lot of emotional struggle that we are not connecting. Because I remember how much more full I felt and happier and at peace once I started being more at peace with this time of my month or this cycle that I go through. And so yeah, I think there's so many options out there right now that women that want to try, you know, it's one of those things. You'll never know if it's not going to work for you unless you try it.
Yeah.
And it just allows you to see how much blood you have every time. And I feel like there's just so much knowledge there. And so again, I feel like the unknown is a very scary place for most of us.
Yeah. It's
We were
it's another way to like observe your body and your health, right? And you know what is normal and what is not normal, and you have all these indicators of your health that we just ignore for the most part, for that kind of fear of not wanting to touch it or be connected with it in some kind of way, right? And I think that's so important also.
It definitely feel like if you want to see it a different way, and if you're not really fully sold on the idea of the all the great benefits that it has, you might, you know, realize that at least the money part also is amazing. Yeah, like you're saving a lot of money. You don't realize it that at the beginning, but you're saving a lot of money and a lot of trips to the grocery store for this one thing. Or, you know, I even joked with the girls at the girl circle because I'm like, and you'll remember this one because I'm sure every woman remembers this one. You're in a girl bathroom, right? Which means only girls are in there. You have your menstrual cycle and you're really scared of like grabbing the pad because that little plastic paper is going to make a noise. And you go like so fast so that other women don't hear that you're having your menstrual cycle, which they also have. So that's how hard, like how strong the conditioning is. Like we're so ashamed of it with other women in a area where only women are, you know. So hey, the reusable pads and menstrual cups wouldn't make that sound if you're concerned about like somebody else being hearing, oh, nobody could hear that I have this, you know. It's just so quiet and nice and it's just my own thing.
That's so true. I definitely remember having an experience like that, because it makes a noise and you're like, oh, everybody's gonna know. That's so funny. I was also thinking about this, you know, a lot of times women can experience extreme pain and discomfort and many symptoms, hormonal, that make them kind of hate their period that time of the month, and it can be really long and excruciating. And I wonder what your thoughts are on that lack of connection with it, and maybe that pain, you know, because it's hard to reconcile that without, you know, some kind of, people feel like medical intervention. But I know I've done a lot of things to do with diet and exercise and mindset that have really shifted the pain I experience and the length of it, and all kinds of stuff. So I wonder if you could maybe shed some light on that connection.
Yeah, well, you know, and actually that's exactly what we all should do. And again, it comes all to knowledge. If somebody explained to us what hormonally speaking is happening inside of our body, because we can't see it, right? The only part that you really see is your menstrual blood. But if you knew that what levels of hormones and how they come up and down throughout your cycle, then you would realize, and it's all really about diet and exercise. It really, more than anything, is just that, because then you know when your estrogen level is high or low, what to feed your body. Both like hydration wise, herbal teas are amazing, and what food to like try to, you know, keep away from, and what food to try to immerse yourself in during the different moments of your cycle. Every woman would feel the change almost immediately, right? Because what happens is that as you get to your premenstrual part of your cycle, there's a lot of inflammation going on. So you ideally want to try to consume foods that help with inflammation, teas, and slowly try to like take away caffeine during that time and introduce something else, like an herbal tea that can help. Like ginger tea is amazing. And red raspberry leaf is also really good to always kind of throughout the whole month. But
Which one?
and I know it's hard because we don't want to give up coffee. Like, I'm a coffee lover.
Which
But the
herb did you say
caffeine,
there? That last, what was the last herb
red
you mentioned?
raspberry leaf.
Red raspberry leaf. Okay, cool. Yeah, I know if I drink coffee in the run up, it makes it way worse. If I increase my ginger intake, I know these things for a fact now, but it took me a long time to come to that, you know, and
Right,
experimentation.
and it's all about the knowledge, and we are at a point in our life where technology provides us with that knowledge if we want to take it. Like the tools are there. It's whether if somebody can help you open the door. Like all of a sudden somebody hears this conversation and they're like, oh, you know, and that was all we did. We planted that seed and now you're off and you're going to find the right ways that work for you. But definitely diet is probably the biggest one. Like, you know, extremely processed foods during certain period of your menstrual cycle will really make those symptoms worse. And exercise is really important because we get that blood flowing, right? And a lot of the pain that we feel is because the blood is not getting properly, that oxygen is not properly getting to where it has to get to. So for us, you know, our body, the only way it can communicate with us so that we can kind of get slapped in the face a little bit and say, hey, you have to do something about it, is through pain. So unfortunately, the pain is really talking to us saying, no, it is not normal for you to have this pain. It is not normal to not be able to like get up because of the pain. So your body's talking to you in the way that it knows how to get your attention, and saying, don't just take another pill. Like, we have to, there's something else that has to, you know, change right now. Lay off the sugars, no caffeine right now, get some rest, go walking, you know. So it's definitely most of it diet.
Yeah,
Our body, when we feel pain, is trying to talk to us to say, we would function better if you provided us what we need
yeah.
instead of eating.
And how liberating that is to know that you have access to be able to help yourself. And I know it's not like it is a slower process, but it's so worth it, right? I
It's
my final question that I ask everyone, I would just love to know what it means to you to live well.
right. So for me, to live well, I think with what I have lived in my life, I guess right now is I really is I think there's a couple of things. I feel like learning how to be present, like present with myself and with what's happening to me, gets me in a better life, and like I feel better about life when I'm not constantly thinking about what has to be done or what already happened, and I can just focus on that. It brings me more peace. And you know, living well for me also just, it really comes down to, for me, is if I have a feeling of support and around me, it makes me feel like no matter what, everything will be okay. Um, and learning how to not take more than I need. Living well for me is like, you know, there's that saying, everything else more than you need is kind of poison for you. Like when you, anything, food wise, stuff wise, anything. I think that would be for me living well, would be like living at a minimum, not minimalist, because it's really not minimalist. It's just where you have to be. Like with enough for you to be satisfied without feeling like, you know, all this excess sometimes does more harm than it really brings peace. So I really do feel like part of living well too comes in like giving, taking and giving. I feel completely at peace when I know that I can give back to the community, or I give back to people around me just out of the pure kindness of my heart. I feel like it puts this energy that keeps me in that well bubble. Like, oh, well, that's all I need. And, you know, oh, and I'm a mom. So for me, as long as nobody gets hurt at the end of the day, we're good.
Andrea, it was an absolute pleasure speaking to you this evening for you and this morning for me. I love what you do. I love hearing all about it, and you're just contributing in such a beautiful way to the world and the community around you. It was an honor to have you on the show. I hope you have a
Thank
good
you so much for having me. And oh, there's a book I would reference if any woman wants to. It's an amazing book. It's called, well, there's two that I feel like when it comes to really changing your feminine ways. One is called Red Moon by Miranda Gray, and the other one is called 4 Seasons and 4 Weeks by Susanna, and I forgot her last name.
4 seasons in
But
4 weeks.
yeah, 4 Seasons, 4 Weeks. It's an extremely well written book on how we can connect with our inner cycle by comparing it to the seasons.
Amazing.
4 weeks.
Yes.
So it's amazing.
Beautiful. I love that. Thank you so much.
For all this information that you put out there, and I'm sure that people that you talk to and that come and you talk to and interview in your podcast, or like just putting out this information, is amazing that we're taking the tools that we have to use them properly.
So. Yeah.
Hello. Take care.
Amazing. I'm going to stop recording now, but that was